those of you who do not know who the crazy conducting musicians up here are, my name is Ben.
I'm Jerry, and we're your White House communication staff.
We hope everyone's been having a fantastic weekend at the West Wing weekend. Have you?
3 more days.
3. Honestly, with some of the panels and the events and the wonderful people that we've met over the last 3 days, we honestly could keep this going another 3 days. But we know you're tired, Clay, so that just means we have to do this again next year, wink, wink, or the year after, wink, wink.
Clay's like literally passing out.
We're going to make West Wing Weekend 2020 banners. That's what we're going to do and make it happen. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, before we get started, a few things we just want to let you know. One, welcome to the Keynote Luncheon. We're glad to have you all here. We're going to get started in just a moment. At 3 o'clock, one of our very special events coming up today is the presentation of Isaac and Ishmael. That's going to be at 3 o'clock in the amphitheater or the White Oak Room? In the White Oak Room. We're really, really excited for this. We've been waiting for this for a really long time, so we hope you guys come to that. Also, the closing ceremony will be at 5 p.m., also in the White Oak Room. It's going to feature a special performance from the Weekend Poofs. I love that name, by the way. It's brilliant. And a few surprises as well. So we hope to see everyone there to, I won't say wrap up the West Wing weekend, but to wrap it up until what's next. Yeah.
Now people are thinking you're going to actually rap again. Yeah, exactly. We are very excited for the keynote topic, which is the cultural and historical significance of the West Wing. Our panelists today are David Kusnet, who is the chief speechwriter for former President Clinton. Also professional male model. Gautam Raghavan, who is a former advisor to President Obama and liaison to the LGBT community, as well as the Asian and Pacific American community. Another former model.
We've already spent an amazingly fun amount of time with these two lovely ladies, but from the series The West Wing, Miss Kim Webster and Devika Parikh. And to formally bring up all of our panelists and moderate the keynote today, please welcome to the stage entertainment journalist, author, and TV writer for the Washington Post, Mr. Zachary Pincus-Roth.
Thank you for the introduction. Is this okay? Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just do a little bit of, I guess, a little more of their bios and have them come up as I say them. David Kusnet was the chief speechwriter for former President Bill Clinton during the 1992 campaign and the first 2 years of the administration. He was also a speechwriter for Democratic nominees Walter Mondale and Michael Dukakis. And he has authored several books, including Speaking American, How the Democrats Can Win in the 90s. Please welcome David Kusnet. So Gautam Raghavan, he was President Barack Obama's liaison to the LGBT community, as well as the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. He was also the acting White House liaison for the U.S. Department of Defense, and he worked on the 2008 Obama campaign. He is also the editor of the new book West Wingers and a contributor. Please welcome Gautam Raghavan. Kim Webster, among many roles, played Ginger on The West Wing. And she is now a documentary and reality TV producer working on such shows as Born This Way and many others. Please welcome Kim Webster. And Devika Parikh has played Bonnie on The West Wing, and she has over 20 years of experience in the entertainment business. She's been on shows such as Shameless and Bizaardvark and 24 and many others. Please welcome Devika. So this panel is a unique panel. We have 2 staffers and 2 actors, and so it's...
Pretend staffers?
And so we're going to sort of take a bit of a step back and look at the historical and cultural significance of the show, and hopefully we don't repeat too much of what you've heard during this weekend, but I think it's a good opportunity to kind of take a step back and look at the sort of bigger issues that the show brings up. So let's start with our staffers, and let's start with David. As someone who worked in the White House before the show, how did you feel about the way the show portrayed your job in the White House?
Well, thank you all for coming here and for listening. I don't know if some of you were at the panel at about this time yesterday, but we were talking about how in the Clinton-Gore administration there had been a 25% cutback in White House staff, which was a promise that President Clinton made and delivered on, with the result that those of us who had the honor of serving as White House speechwriters worked very hard, because I don't know that there was ever a president who spoke as often as President Clinton did. And we had 4 senior speechwriters, and where previously and afterwards there were at least 6 senior speechwriters in most administrations. So we were working very hard, and we were very honored and grateful to be working very hard for a president we believed in the White House. But when I left, I was very tired. And I remember actually in President Clinton's book, My Life, he has one glancing mention of the speechwriters, including me, and he said, they must have been tearing their hair out. And in my case, I assume that he was right, because if you see a photo of me when I went to work there, I had hair. And sometime thereafter, that no longer is true. So President Clinton was right in what he said. So I remember after I left the White House and when West Wing was on the air, my wife wanted to watch it with me, and I watched it one time, and I just sort of got these feelings of exhaustion and frustration. The exhaustion just thinking how hard the writers worked when they went off camera and sat at their keyboards and went through 20 drafts of one speech. And I guess a little frustration at the fact that, in the interests of drama and creating an interesting show and a show that explores important issues, there were episodes where there would be meetings where people, junior and senior, in different kinds of roles, would be talking about both what's good policy and what's good politics. And sometimes you'd have the two would be in conflict, and it would make for great drama. And in a larger sense, that is what working in the White House is about. But I remember very few of those, being present at very few of those meetings myself, and spending a lot of time on my keyboard or on the phone trying to get people to give me information. And I was sort of frustrated to see these sort of high-level seminars on public morality. My recollection of the White House was sitting at the keyboard and trying to produce stuff. But eventually I did bring myself to watch it, as your presence here demonstrates it as a great show. It, I think, had a wonderful effect on this country in providing a sense of what democracy and the work of our elected officials and the people who work for them ought to be like. I think it set a standard that probably has contributed to several waves of people wanting to get active in politics and public service, certainly most notably now with the wave of candidates, I think, finally at long last, most of them women, who are running for office, who don't have careers in politics and who weren't like 12-year-olds who were thinking about how they would become president or on the Supreme Court or something, but are people who care and want to make a difference. And I think even though it was some time ago, I think West Wing helped create a cultural climate where public service is viewed as an honorable calling. And in a sense, the American psyche is, on politics, is sort of a battle between West Wing and House of Cards. I'm glad that, and even if we're being governed, in my view, by House of Cards, I'm glad that the West Wing view is beginning to prevail in popular culture and public views of what government is and ought to be.
Gautam, you worked in the West Wing after the show came out. How did working in the West Wing compare to the show, and also to what extent was the West Wing in the minds of people working in the Obama White House? To what extent did you guys think about the West Wing and talk about it?
A lot. I came into sort of my political awareness at the start of my career when the West Wing was on. So for me, it was everything that I wanted in politics, in government. This very sort of hopeful, aspirational, patriotic view of public service, as David just mentioned. And literally, you could not have scripted like Santos Obama like in a more clear way. So for many of us who campaigned for the president in 2008 and then worked in the White House, it felt like the West Wing was like coming to life, right? Like I mentioned this on an earlier panel. It was, you have this professor-in-chief who's brilliant, and then this cast of supporting characters who are people from every walk of life who didn't come from money or privilege or power, but really wanted to serve their country, and are kind of quirky in their own weird ways. Fewer like, Josh and Donna type things, though. So in a lot of ways, I think a lot of us, it was a defining part of our cultural experience that led us to that White House. And when we got there, the show gets a lot of things wrong, let's be clear, right? Like the day-to-day grind is very different and far less glamorous. I sort of imagined like I'd be like Sam Seaborn and I'd give a great monologue and I'd change someone's mind, and no. It's a lot of memos, a lot of being on your BlackBerry at all times of day. So a lot of the day-to-day stuff gets sort of missed, right? Because it's just not that sexy. But the big picture stuff was exactly right. It was as hopeful and inspirational and aspirational as I hoped it would be. And sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Oh, you talked about it a little bit, but sort of how, to what extent did the West Wing sort of inspire people in the Obama administration? You get into politics, and to what extent was it on their minds and discussed when you were working there?
Yeah, and when you're in it, obviously there's like no time to talk about anything, but I do feel like, and especially now in reflection when we see, as David mentioned, the contrast to where we are today, that it does feel like the core of it, the sort of essence of it rings true.
Kim, I was wondering if you could talk about just how you got to be on the West Wing and got to have your role, and sort of what was it like to be on the show in its heyday amid the reactions to the show?
Well, I've told this story several times, so forgive me if you've heard it before, but I was actually hired as a one-day background performer for the pilot. And, over time, Aaron had been, it felt like maybe secretly auditioning me at cast read-throughs, like if a actor couldn't be there. For example, the first time was Elizabeth Moss. You may have heard of her. She couldn't be there, and so they asked me to come in and read her part for Crackpots and These Women, where her character was introduced. So I knew nothing about who Zoe was other than she was Bartlett's daughter, she was in college and a teenager. So I made some quick choices because acting was my major in college, and yada, yada, yada. 7 years later, Ginger was there for it all. So I would also like to say that Devika and I are highly unqualified to be up here.
Don't tell them.
I have a feeling they're going to figure it out really quickly. And I, too, Zach, would like to know, what was the second part of your question?
Yeah, just like what was it like to be on the show in its heyday? What sort of reactions did you get? And what was it like to be on a hit show about politics that was sort of shaping people's ideas of politics?
I knew from day one that this was going to be huge. I just knew it, you felt it, and we were working with the best of the best. So every single day I was so grateful. We would never hang out in our trailers like actors do on most shows. We sat there on stage and watched these phenomenal performers bring this show to life. I felt like I worked in the White House. Like, I really did. The sets were so amazing. Unless you looked at the ceiling, which was all like stage lights, you really felt like you were there. You know, and this was at a time before social media and before like TMZ and all these other blogs. So I think we got off pretty easy. But I remember being in New York with my brother, like going to TRL, and someone in line was like, "Oh my God, that's Ginger," and my brother's like, "How the hell do they know that?" And I was like, "Oh my God, like this is real." Because I mean, you know, I told you guys yesterday, I was basically the door whore of the West Wing, just standing in doorways saying, you know, like taking orders for popcorn and whatnot. So, I mean, like, I really didn't expect, you know, to be recognized. And sometimes, you know, 20-year-olds will come up to me and be like, "Oh, my teacher used to make me watch your show in government class." And I was like, well, A, bite me. And B, oh, that's cool. So, yeah, I mean, I think we knew we were in a very special place, and it was a real family environment, and I'm very, very grateful for every minute.
And Devika, same question. How did you get your role, and what was it like to kind of be on the show?
Thank you for giving me an easy question. And unlike him, I'm going to pretend like I fit in up here. I actually auditioned for it, and it was funny because it was one line. And back then, when I was auditioning, when I first got out to LA, they didn't email you scripts. You had to go pick a script up. So I called my agent. I said, "Oh, you know, I really want a script sent to my house so I can read it." They said, "You're auditioning for one line. We're not going to do that. We're not going to waste paper doing that." I was like, "Fine, I'll come to the office." And as I sat there and read it, I was like, wow, this is really good. The writing, the everything about it was just so excellent. So I did all my actor stuff and wrote my little bio for one line. And then when I got to the audition, I saw a lot of my girlfriends, because in LA and New York, I'm sure when you're auditioning in a certain age range, certain ethnicity, you see the same people over and over. And as the years go on, sometimes some of those people drop away, they do other things. But every good African-American actress was there. I was like, "Ooh, wow, she's here, she's here." So when I went and I had all this stuff planned, and when I walked in the door, Aaron Sorkin was there. I went to Syracuse University. He's a big supporter he's a Syracuse alumni. He didn't know that when they brought me in. And I had to say this line, and I remember I was thinking, okay, I'm gonna, do like a walk and talk, and I'm gonna pull the pencil from behind my ear and write stuff down. So they're saying the script, and then I get to my line, and I'm like this. And the pencil got stuck in my ear, and I was like, oh gosh. Oh. And then I tried to write it down, and I walked out the door, and I went, oh my gosh, I sucked. I had one line, and I couldn't get it out. I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh. And driving home, I kept saying the one line. Should I get everybody in? Should I get everybody in? Should I get everybody in? And this is what actors do. We drive home and we just go, oh, I should have done this. I practiced it that way. What happened? And I'm driving home going, oh my gosh, I suck. I mean, that's so embarrassing. And then like maybe a day later, I got a call and they're like, okay, you're going to be hired for the West Wing. I said, really? I was like, it's one line, yay. I was so excited.
Should I get everybody in?
So I got a coach to help. I'm kidding. So then the one line turned into a 9-day shoot. I was there, they put me in some other scenes, but I still just had that one line. After the pilot aired, and we all knew it was really special. We just knew from reading it. We knew from the first table read. You all probably know this. When they do a show, we sit down with all the other actors at the table. We read through the script. The writers go back and rewrite. They cut things, they edit things, they do things to make it work better. And then we keep getting new drafts of it while we're shooting. So, after the first shoot, they didn't call me for a couple of weeks. And then after maybe they did the 3rd or 4th episode, they called my agent and said, we'd like to recur her. And I was like, which means ongoing work on the show. And I was just so grateful because it was such a good show. And I was telling them this yesterday. I had done nothing but comedy up to that point. I was doing a lot of sketch comedy and improv. And so I was doing a lot of sitcom work. So to get a 1-hour drama that was still witty and funny, but a 1-hour drama on a show with a really multi-dimensional aspect, I was really excited.
One question I had for the staffers, I guess you talked about it a little bit in terms of public service. I mean, in what other ways did the show influence how people thought about both your jobs and about politics generally? Sort of what are sort of the lasting effects of the way the show portrayed the West Wing?
I mean, I'll say for me and the folks I worked with, it was, I think there were a couple things. One was that it was a show, like a lot of Sorkin's work, that was so grounded in principle and values, right? And so I think for a lot of us, that was what we found in our work at the White House too. And you know, politics, government is hard work. It's, as they say, you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. And so for a lot of us who came off the campaign, we're like, oh, now we actually have to do the work. And you realize that the day-to-day can be really demoralizing. Dealing with Congress it's rough. Even when you have the majority, which we did for the first 2 years, the way the media picks up and talks about what you're doing is sometimes not very charitable. Within the building, there are personalities. We were talking earlier about how the personalities are more like Veep than they are like West Wing, because people are quirky. And there's frustrations, right? Especially when you're doing work on social justice or civil rights issues and you can't get something done. It's really frustrating. You feel like, if we could only do this, it would change people's lives. But I think having at the core a set of values and principles that came from the president on down was what I found in the show and what I found in real life as well. So that was certainly similar. And I think, again, to reinforce something that David said at the very beginning, is this idea of there's a nobility in public service, that government has the power to change people's lives. You know, I was and am a progressive Democrat, so I believed that to be the case. I sort of had faith that was the case. But then after working in government, I know that is actually the case. I know that to be true, that more than the private sector or philanthropy or advocacy, in government you have more ability to shape people's lives for the better than anywhere else. And so I think, again, having that sort of value set that helps you get through the really tough days, and then when you see positive change happens and you see the impact it has, and there's nothing quite like that.
David, do you?
I guess in hindsight, I almost wish that West Wing had come out maybe or before President Clinton was elected. That had been the notion that public service can be about more than just partisan politics and personal advancement had been part of the popular culture before 1992 and 1993, because, and I imagine that the people here who work for President Obama, I imagine would agree with what I'm saying, that if you're in the White House working for a progressive president who's trying to make positive change, you need pressure on the outside, not just to push your own programs through, but even to be to your left, people who are pushing you further than you seem to want to go, to make up for the kinds of pressures that I believe the Obama administration faced and that we faced from people on the right who are resistant to any kind of change. Like I said, to pick one example, the healthcare program, which having worked in an administration that was not able to pass healthcare reform, I have to really, if I had a tip my hat to the Obama administration for enacting healthcare and hoping there'd be millions of people who can now get healthcare for their families who could not have gotten it without it. But you need to have the pressure on the outside that supports what you're doing, and you need to even have the kind of pressure that a lot of us in the Clinton administration got from our friends who were saying, you're letting us down, you're betraying us, why aren't you keeping your promise to have more domestic social investment? Why didn't you change NAFTA to make it better for working people in the environment? You need, unpleasant as it is for staffers in an administration to be yelled at by their friends, you need that. And I think for me, and this is from reading history, not from watching any movie, I think really an emblematic, I think if there's one sort of story I would tell about what the presidency ought to be, a progressive presidency ought to be about, it's going back to President Franklin Roosevelt's administration, where he wanted to institute the Fair Employment Practices Commission. And there was just all kinds of opposition to it from the Dixiecrats in the Democratic Party, from some in the business community, from all kinds of places, and very little support for it. And there's the famous story, or at least famous to people who read presidential histories, of a meeting that he had with the great A. Philip Randolph, the founder of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and late in life, the organizer of the 1963 March on Washington. And Mr. Randolph was there with leaders of the NAACP and the Urban League and some of the more progressive national unions. And they were yelling at President Roosevelt. They were not yelling, but respectfully being critical of President Roosevelt for not pushing further. And what President Roosevelt essentially said was, I like what you're telling me. Now go out there and say that in public and make me do it, force me to do it. And that's what presidents need, is pressure on the outside to force them to do the right thing, because there's so much institutional inertia and so much pressure to prevent them from doing the right thing. And I think in addition to being an absolutely great show, I think the contribution that West Wing and I think other cultural phenomena like it at about the same time, the movie about the American presidency with Michael Douglas, and the movie Dave, and some others that I think were part of a cultural phenomenon at that time. What they did was, I think they inspired people to think that public service and government and public activism is a noble calling, and to be out there, whether they're running for Congress or organizing marches on Washington or organizing unions or other organizations in their workplaces and their communities, to have the kind of pressure that will make a president like President Obama or President Clinton or the president we elect in 2020 do the right thing. That really, I think, is not just the cultural, but ultimately what should be the historical legacy of a cultural phenomenon like the West Wing.
One question for the performers is, you've been in the entertainment business for a while. How has TV changed since then? In terms of your experience and the process. Obviously, The West Wing was a big network show, and since then we've had more cable shows, Netflix. It's now like the peak TV era where there's so many options. In what ways has the business changed in such a way that maybe The West Wing happened today, it would be different?
I definitely, it's hard for me to keep up with all the new shows. And I think with all the things that are streaming and cable, and we used to do like 21 episode seasons, right? Was it 21, 22? 24.
22 to 24.
It was a lot of shows for networks, and we would do that many shows in one season. Now you're having shows that are doing like 10 episodes, and then they go away for a while and they pop back. It's like you never really know what's going on. You're like, wow. But I think that it probably would have had more competition because more people are streaming, definitely. And more people get their information from, online stuff and, their phones. Back when we were doing this, it just wasn't as, we were still using VHS and DVD, right? I think we were morphing into DVD. So I definitely think I think it could still be a hit. I just think that it would be a little bit more watered down just because of all the competition, And there's a lot of smart TV. There's just a lot of smart writing, and people are open to so much more diversity and so many more ideas and different types of situations. But I still think that a show like The West Wing is so relevant because, like everybody had said and we talked about, it gives you hope. It gives you hope that there are people that really have a good moral compass, whether you agree with them or not. And that's the thing that I miss about Senator John McCain. It's like, he wasn't necessarily fighting just to be a Republican. You see him fighting for what's right. And in every business, whether it's politics, entertainment, doctors, lawyers, you want people who are going to do the right thing, even if it costs them. That's what I would want.
And I agree with Devika about how there is so much competition now. There's a gazillion stations, but one thing, she said there's so much smart TV. Well, I think that's because of Aaron Sorkin, that he raised the bar And I don't think that there was that much smart TV back in the day. I mean, there were some great shows, ER, but like Aaron really raised the bar, and I feel like people are really rising to the level, and so there is a lot. It would be a different time now, I think, because there are so many shows on, and it would probably be watered down, but I think it would stand up today. And I think it's proved itself with being on Netflix now and how much you guys are watching the show again, and all the new audiences coming in because of Netflix.
Can I add something real quick, which is, I'm not a performer, but my one critique, and I'm a big fan of the show, but my one critique of it is that, and I think it's one that people share, is that it wasn't a diverse cast, right, in terms of the senior staff. And so I do think that if you had the West Wing on TV today, like, you guys would be senior staff, right? Like, we need to have like that kind of representation of what the White House looks like.
Right.
Yeah, because they did bring in Dulé Hill later. It was after the show, and I think it was because
Episode 3, I mean, it was still pretty early.
I mean, that was one of my questions I wanted to ask at some point. I mean, you know, people have talked about how the show has been criticized for having this sort of very white male cast and perspective, and you know, have talked about, you know, had critiques of some of the way the female characters have been portrayed, and Josh and Donna relationship and things like that. I mean, how do you, I guess, to what extent do you as performers, or even you guys as viewers, feel that way about the show? And yeah, how might you feel like the show would be done differently now?
Well, I would like to say that the redheaded community was really represented, and we're only 2% of the whole world, so we were really represented, but everyone else, maybe not so much.
wait, what was the question again?
Just sort of, I mean, basically, like, to what extent do you agree with sort of critiques of the show in terms of representation, and you know, to what extent will the show be very different today?
I agreed with what you said. I think it would be very different, especially after having Obama in office, that something that you never, like, you know, my mother, they would have never expected that. My mom was African American, my father was East Indian. Both of them have passed, but my mother would have, you know, that type of thing, like to see an African American in office who's proud to be that, you know, changes so much and gives so much hope to people of all, I think, all ethnicities, that you really can do what you think might be impossible, or what we tell ourselves, that's just never gonna happen in my lifetime. It's so inspirational, whether you agree with Obama or not, you know? But I agree with what he said, that now if we did this show today, you would see a huge minority presence in that White House. You know, they did bring on a lot of guest stars that were African American and other races, and Native American and Hispanic, but the main staffers, I think that would make a huge difference.
And with Jimmy Smith coming on, you know, later, I think that was the beginning of that change. Right. And if the show had kept going, I think that we would have seen more of that. And I don't know if it's, you know, life imitating art or art imitating life, but when Obama was elected, I was like, oh my gosh, this really is like, first Jimmy Smith and now Obama? Like, what's next? Get it? A redheaded president.
Well, I wanted to sort of go right at the issue of, you know, how the show has resonated in different ways, you know, in different administrations. There's one thing, I wrote an article about the West Wing a few months ago, and this was something I found in my research, just like the way the show resonated during the Clinton era, and then Bush, and then Obama, and then obviously now during the Trump era. I was wondering if you guys had any sort of specific examples from the show that, I don't know, resonated with you either today or in its time, you know, sort of with the administration, that sort of made you see, I don't know, have a perspective on what was going on in politics.
I mean, I will say, well, two things. As mentioned before, I mean, the campaign in the 6th and 7th seasons, like it matches, it was prescient, right? Like, you have a young man of color who picks a seasoned veteran as his VP running against a cranky maverick. It's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened in 2008. But you know, after working in the White House, I go back and watch episodes, and as I mentioned, some of the day-to-day stuff they get wrong, but some of the politics they get exactly right. And I remember the whole series of episodes around the shutdown. I mean, we went through that, right? And it felt very, very like smart and informed and real for me. So that's one example right there.
Anyone else?
Well, I want to do a shout out to somebody, you all would know better than I, but I think my friend Eli Addy had a role in writing it. And he's certainly somebody who was very, not just a great writer and a great human being, but certainly very knowledgeable about politics, and certainly the politics of the 90s. I actually knew him before he worked in the Clinton-Gore administration, when he worked for Mayor Dinkins in New York City. And I remember he was recommended to us by people who had worked with Mayor Dinkins. So I just wanted, in addition to the faces you all see on the screen, I guess when you see the credits at the very end, I think he's one of the credits.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to do a shout out to him.
Oh, yes. We love Eli. Listen, I'm too politically ignorant to comment on this, so I'm gonna...
I mean, is there anything in today's era, in the Trump era, that where you sort of think back to the West Wing and something about it, some episode resonates or some character issue resonates or that you think about?
Honestly, with the current administration, it just really makes me miss Bartlett and wish that, we can go into that fantasy land and make it real. It's just all kind of depressing.
I think, I think there's good and bad in every level of society. And you have some people that are really honorable, and people are multifaceted. And I think the West Wing, and watching Bartlett struggle with doing the right thing and then being the president and having to represent everybody, I think that you always want somebody who has that. We aspire to that. And I think that gives us hope that we have people in every part of society. They're going to fight to do what's right, not just side with
What's right for
friends.
them.
Right, and not have an alternative agenda and not have an off moral compass. You want good people in leadership in every area, no matter what career it is, and I think that gives us that hope,
I'm going to throw it open to audience questions in a second. I think people can line up is there a microphone over there? And while people are lining up, you're welcome to come ask a question. But just one last question for me is, I was wondering how you feel like that show fits in this sort of like pantheon of DC political shows or movies. I mean, since then we've had, there's been Veep, there's been Scandal, and even like The Americans, and Murphy Brown just came back this week. I was sort of wondering how you feel the show kind of fits into the pantheon of shows, and maybe to some extent inspired some of these shows. House of Cards is like that as well, obviously.
I think it's definitely inspired a lot of the shows. I actually haven't seen. I've seen a couple seasons of House of Cards, but that's it. I'm usually on the road internationally, so I haven't really been able to keep up with TV. But for sure, I think Aaron's work has inspired a lot of these shows.
I think TV can be used for so many things, obviously, in TV shows, because writers have to do a good job doing research. Otherwise, the audience isn't going to buy it. If you're watching like an ER or something like that, and you're like, doctors don't do that, and you're a doctor. So they have to do the research. So they had some real heavy hitters on the West Wing, analysts like Lawrence O'Donnell and people like that were always consulting and making sure that the writing was right. But I think having that level of excellence makes people want to know more. It's sort of like inviting you into a process, like the legal process, that me, as a regular citizen, I might not have ever really known, paid attention to. And then when you see it dramatized like that, and then having people like Josh and Donna's relationship, which is, sexy and cute, and you need that. It draws us in as an audience, but it also informs and educates. And I think that's such an important thing. It's it's edutainment, because it's entertaining you, but you're being educated, especially if it's a topic you're really not familiar with. You're like, wow, that really happens? And it makes you more interested in it. So I think in that way, it's very multi-purposeful and very important.
And I would just say, I so wish we had a show on TV right now, because not just as an antidote to all the horrible things that are actually happening, but I think about it like the young person who is becoming engaged or politically active right now. Like, what model do they have, right? What show's inspiring you to a career in public service? Like, there's really not much out there, so there's a huge void for that.
Do we have a question?
So it's kind of a two-part. So first part for Kim and Devika, and the second part for you. When it came to some of the big issues that were being talked about, which were also being talked about, concurrently, like Don't Ask, Don't Tell, some of the women's issues, the hate crimes, those kinds of things. On set, were you also talking about them amongst each other, or were you just so focused on the work? Like, how much did that permeate?
I mean, we're going back a couple of years here.
I know. Sorry.
I don't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. But I mean, honestly, this would probably be a question more for the main cast, and I'm sure that they probably talked about that. I'm sure it came up with us, but I don't really remember to what extent. Do you, Devika?
Like when you're on a set, because there's the hours are so long and arduous, and there's time in between, and you got to reset and retake and touch-ups and redo the lighting and this, that, the in-between takes were really sort of playing. Either you're trying to stay awake, you're, talking about personal stuff, you're talking about what you did last night where you took your kids. So
You have kids?
No, other people's
kids. You took other people's kids?
Yes. Awkward. But so I think, it's sort of like wherever you are, whether you're in a hospital, wherever, they're not always talking about that topic. Sometimes they're just talking about, working out, what I mean? And I think we were more like that on set, like just people trying to, have the best atmosphere, telling stories, getting to know each other. I think it was more that than really deep issues.
Yeah.
But the topics that were brought up, Aaron, has a very strong point of view, and so he's going to write things from his point of view also to challenge us and to make us think and to say this isn't right. And so those types of storylines come from a writer, and then the actors are used to really bring it to life and give those characters multi-dimension.
Yeah.
And we probably brought those topics back into our real lives and talked about it in our real lives, like with my family. I'm sure I, spoke about, like, with my father, who's a Catholic deacon, I'm sure we talked about all the issues that came up on the show, but not necessarily amongst the cast. I don't remember that, but definitely, like, with family and friends, for sure.
So then the sort of the second part of the question, especially in the Obama administration, how much sort of going back and saying, I remember this discussion that happened on an episode, Fitz coming in and saying, they desegregated, did it screw up the unit? Yes, and the unit got over it. Those kinds of things. How much?
That's the exact example that I was thinking with the episodes about marriage, especially with the gay congressman, right? Who's not, which still I don't understand, but anyway, and the conversations around Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But the thing that I think stuck with me the most, that I think actually the show prepared me the most for, was the idea that the president is a human being, that he is not perfect, and that he is flawed at times, and reacts to things in the same way. I mean, I think when you see Bartlett, get pissed off or treat a staff badly or yell at someone, it's good preparation for when you actually have to be in that actual situation, right? Which President Obama was always very nice. But I saw him in a bad mood. I saw him get frustrated. I saw him express anger, and I think it was good preparation for that.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Malia, and I got to meet Kim and Devika yesterday. We talked about the Peace Corps that your sister served. I also served in the Peace Corps. I don't know if there are any Peace Corps people out there. There's one Peace Corps mug on the West Wing. You can look it up. It's amazing. Very exciting. I had my tickets, too, this weekend, about 15 seconds after I saw it advertised in the city paper. So thank you for that ad. I appreciate that. And I was just wondering, when you heard about this weekend, what was your reaction to hearing that this was going on? Including the moderator.
What year is it? That was basically felt like I've been in like a coma for a dozen years, and I was like, I was on a TV show? I don't even remember.
It was a long time ago, and I was like, do I remember the episodes? Like, what happened? Some of those questions come up. I'm like, did we do that?
Yes, Devika, we did.
We were there. But I think because, like Kim was saying, it was such a long time ago, but the more I've been here, like this weekend, the more I go, oh yeah, that's right, that did happen. I did feel like that. That was, I had to really process it, because I was a little like, concerned that I wouldn't remember a lot of stuff. But I always remember the experience and the significance at the time, like what it meant to my career as an actress, and also just the value of the show itself, the level of excellence, and what Aaron Sorkin was able to bring to TV and really affect a lot of people with, is long lasting. It's a legacy. Yeah.
And despite it being a dozen years ago and being surprised that you guys wanted to do this, we're absolutely thrilled. And it's been an amazing weekend. I'm going to need a week vacation just to recover from smiling so much.
Yeah, it's an honor.
I was surprised, but also not, because I almost was also surprised, like, oh, how come there hasn't been something like this before? And I also had gone to one of the West Wing weekly tapings in DC, and just sort of seeing this sort of almost like the the fervor among the fans there, both in the audience and in the lobby before and after. I was sort of like, all right, yeah, this totally makes sense that this would happen. So.
I was actually with Melissa Fitzgerald and Richard Schiff at a political fundraiser when she told me about it, because I'm making a plug for my book. So I just edited a book that's a collection of stories from the Obama White House called West Wingers, obviously, which came out last Tuesday. And so I was telling her about the book, and she was like, you have to come to this weekend. I'm like, what? And then she's like, it's in Bethesda. I'm like, oh my God, I have to be there. So I reached out to Claire. I was like, please, like, can I come? So I can't believe this is the first time it's happening.
Yeah, same.
Hopefully not the last.
Yeah.
I know, tall girl here. On that same type of note, with this being pretty much the first convention for West Wing, and we have such a wonderful representation up here of the reality of politics and the fantasy of politics. Fandom being what it is, and the fact that we have so much TV that has inspired our reality from fantasy. Thank you, Dweedlepin over here, it doesn't work. How do you feel that West Wing, with the reality and fantasy of it, we can be able to define our own reality today? How would you think that we, as fans going forward, can be able to bring the fantasy that is the perfect West Wing forward into our reality today?
I mean, get out and vote, right? Like, yes.
Because I don't think there'll ever be a perfect West Wing, just like there's never a perfect anything, because there's so many, levels. But, being here this weekend, like Kim said, has really been really gratifying. And also, there's so many smart people in the room.
I've never felt dumber in my life.
And then when I have, when teachers are coming up saying, I use this to teach my class, like one woman, we were talking about it, and I go, oh my gosh, it just really, it makes me feel honored as an actress to go, what we do is relevant. Mm-hmm. Whether it's right or wrong, like, their specialty is something different. Ours is in the entertainment business, but the value of what we do is really impressed on me this weekend, about that there's so much value in what we do, and it's so important to use that whatever gift you have to share it with the world, so you can help elevate and do what God's called you to do. Mm-hmm. I know that probably wasn't the question, but that's kind of how I feel.
Well, there's so much of that. I mean, yes, to register to vote, to get out to do that, to encourage people to be able to register to vote, to learn about your primaries in your area, voter drives. I mean, there's so many things, especially as a New Yorker, that we have tried to do. Maybe the professionals, there's something more. I mean, besides volunteering at the voting booths, like what else besides running for office can we be able to do in our communities?
I think you said running for office, obviously. I mean, things like, honestly, calling your congressperson, I mean, it's sort of a cliche thing to call people to do, but it makes such a difference. Especially this week, we've seen senators say, I'm getting these calls, and it really does matter. To David's point earlier, the role of activism and advocacy, especially with so much at stake right now, you can't overstate that. And then the last piece I would say is really consider government service yourself, right? Like, this is about helping people on a day-to-day basis, whether it doesn't have to be in the White House, but it can be, even in state capitals, in your mayor's office, wherever you can plug in locally. I think the only way we shift people's views on what government is and the role it has in their lives is if more of us are involved and we talk about it.
Thank you very much.
Is there one last question?
Hi, Tina. Jerry's a fake name. I just wanted to quickly say thank you all so much for coming to this. It's unbelievable. I've literally cried at every single panel that you guys have participated in. I'm very sensitive, but even if you're just talking about being behind a computer writing speeches, I was very moved by that idea. And I'm sure there's a little part of a lot of people in this room that wish that they could do something like that, or just feel a deep connection to that. So thank you for coming. My question is in regards to the Obama administration. So there was one very specific thing that the Obama administration took from the show, and that was Big Block of Cheese Day.
I was going to ask if that actually happened. I swear to God, that was going to be my question.
So I wanted to know if you played a role in that at all. Did you know what it was when you came in? Were you like, you guys are weird?
That was... Well, so every now and then, so that was a collaboration of our Office of Digital Strategy and the office I worked in was the Public Engagement Office. And it was one of those things where, you get a lot of crazy ideas at the White House, right? And people, come up with things. I mean, Between Two Ferns, which is in the book, that took, months for someone to sign off on. With Big Block of Cheese, it was everyone got it right away. It was yes, we have to do that. It makes so much sense. So that was a no-brainer. It was so easy. So thank you guys for making that possible.
I was seriously going to ask that earlier when you said something about the differences, and I was going to ask if you guys actually did Big Block of Cheese Day as a joke. But to hear that you actually did it is OMG.
Well, thank you so much to the panel. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you guys, really. Thank you guys all so much for having us, really.